5 young women, having escaped from the cruel merchant George Bonecrusher White, found themselves on the brink of death in the desert. White, who considered them his property, will stop at nothing to get them back. But he didn't count on the fact that in a small house amidst the endless fields lives an old man, Samuel Collins, who once lost everything but found a new purpose in these girls. Will he be able to protect them from the greedy predator, or will the story have a tragic end? Like and subscribe, and watch until the end, because the denouement of this story will shock you, teach you wisdom, and give you an important life lesson. In the year 1880, when the Wild West was still truly wild and civilization was only beginning to seep through the endless prairies, the lives of young women were inextricably linked to the concept of a commodity. For many, especially in provincial towns where lawlessness and brute force dominated, their fate was sealed. They were sold into marriage, hired out to saloons, or simply traded like cattle. This grim reality became the starting point for 5 girls who fled a market town called Dead Heart. They were like 5 fragile birds who had broken out of a cage but didn't know where to fly next. The leader among them, Alice, was the oldest and most determined. She was only 19, but her eyes had already seen more pain than some are destined to see in a lifetime. Her sisters Catherine, quiet and shy; Sarah, with a perpetually weary look; Mary, who hid her vulnerability behind a mask of audacity; and the youngest, Hannah, who had not yet lost her childlike faith in miracles, trusted her implicitly. Their escape was not just a flight, but a desperate attempt to preserve their freedom, their humanity, which they were trying to take away from them. They were running from dirty hands, from humiliation, from a future that was more terrifying than any desert. Days turned into weeks, and the endless steppes seemed to mock them. Their supplies of food and water were nearly gone. Their feet were raw and bleeding, and their bodies were utterly exhausted. At night, they huddled together, seeking refuge from the cold and from fear. The fear of being caught and taken back. The pursuit never stopped for a single day. George Bonecrusher White, the owner of that very market, was a cruel and stubborn man. He didn't tolerate disobedience and considered the girls his property, which he would do whatever it took to get back. His anger and cruelty were well known in the area, and the thought that he would catch them instilled in the sisters a terror stronger than hunger and thirst. The climax of their despair came when, exhausted and powerless, they saw a single light in the distance. It was the light from the window of a small, but well-built house, surrounded by a field of ripe wheat.
I ask you to like and subscribe to the channel, so you will help me in motivation to make such great stories for you, and I will see that you like them. Enjoy watching, everyone.
The sky above them was beginning to fill with heavy clouds, heralding a coming storm, and they had no other choice but to take a chance. With their last remaining strength, they made it to the doorstep, where they were met by an elderly man named Samuel "Sam" Collins. His face was etched with deep wrinkles, but in his eyes shone a kindness they hadn't seen in so long. Samuel, a former farmer whose hands were calloused from hard work, had lived a long and, as he thought, lonely life. His wife had died many years ago, and his only son had left to seek gold in California and never returned. He saw before him not just 5 girls, but souls full of pain and fear. He knew at first glance that they were running from something terrible. Without asking any unnecessary questions, he threw open the door of his house, offering them food, water, and a dry, clean place to sleep. His simple, selfless compassion was a genuine shock to the girls. In this world, where everyone only looked out for their own gain, such an act of mercy seemed incredible. They ate, they cried, and for the first time in a long time, they felt safe. But their escape and joy were short-lived. A few days later, when Sam returned from town, he brought with him some terrible news. George Bonecrusher White had sent bounty hunters after them. He announced that the girls were his legal property, who had run away due to temporary insanity, and promised a generous reward to anyone who would bring them back. Sam's words were a death sentence for the girls. They realized that their escape had ended before it had even begun. Their hope for a new life, which had flared up in Samuel's kind house, was now fading before their eyes. The pain of realizing that this oasis of peace and quiet could become a trap for them was unbearable. They were once again in a hopeless situation, but this time they were not alone. Now their trouble had become Samuel's trouble as well, and he, without even realizing it, had stepped up to defend them. Samuel Collins' words hung in the air, like smoke from a long-extinguished fire. To 5 girls, who had just found a glimmer of hope, were once again faced with a brutal reality. The mention of George Bonecrusher White's name was like the crack of a whip. The pain of realizing that their escape was not the end, but only the beginning of a new, more sophisticated game, consumed them completely. It was especially hard for Alice. She saw the flame of fear rekindle in her sister's eyes. Catherine, the shyest, shrank back as if trying to become invisible. Hannah, who had only just started to smile, was now staring into space, her eyes filled with tears. Sarah clenched her fists, and Mary, always audacious, turned away so no one could see her despair. Their pain was palpable, and Samuel, watching them, felt his old heart tighten. He had saved them from the desert, but now he understood that a much more serious ordeal awaited them. "He won't stop," Alice whispered, her voice not just stating a fact, but a deep, long-held pain. "He considers us his property. He announced that we escaped from his market, where we were kept, to work in his saloon. We were sold to him like cattle." Samuel, who had lived his whole life far from big cities and their vices, heard something much deeper in her words. He saw in her and her sisters those whom the system had abandoned to fend for themselves. In his eyes, George White was not just a greedy merchant, but the embodiment of everything he hated about the modern world: callousness, greed, and contempt for human life. For Sam, whose life was built on hard work and honesty, such injustice was unbearable. "Then we will fight," the old man said calmly but firmly. His voice was quiet, but it had a strength that instantly drew the girls' attention. They looked at him in surprise, as if they couldn't believe their ears. "My house is your fortress. You're safe here until we figure out what to do next." Samuel knew that his actions could put his own life in danger, but he couldn't do otherwise. He was alone. His son had left long ago, and in these girls, he saw not just people in need of help, but a piece of what he had lost. In them, he saw a chance to be a father again, a mentor, a protector. This was his revelation. He had found a new purpose, and that purpose was far more important than his own safety. However, as expected, George White did not make them wait long. A few days later, two riders appeared in Samuel's field. They were Jack the Rodent Harper and Thomas the Shorty Black, White's most loyal and ruthless mercenaries. Their horses were in a lather, and their faces were covered in dust and malice. They didn't stand on ceremony and immediately headed for the house, where they were met by Sam. "We're looking for 5 runaways," Jack growled, spitting to the side. His eyes, like two embers, scanned Samuel, seeing nothing in him but an old, useless farmer. "They're Mr. White's property. We know they're here." "There are no runaways here," Sam replied calmly, crossing his arms over his chest. He didn't flinch, even though his heart was pounding wildly in his chest. He knew he was lying, but this lie was for a righteous cause. The mercenaries, sensing something was wrong, began to search the house. They went inside, overturning furniture, smashing dishes. The girls, who had hidden in the old cellar, heard every sound, every shout. Their hearts stood still with terror, but they held on, gritting their teeth, because they knew that not only their lives were at stake, but also the life of the man who had sheltered them. When Jack and Thomas found the secret trapdoor to the cellar, Samuel tried to stop them but was thrown aside like an old rag doll. He fell, hitting his head on the doorframe, and lost consciousness. The terror he felt at that moment was not for himself, but for the girls. He felt helpless, worthless, and his only thought was, "I couldn't protect them." But at that moment, something unexpected happened. When the mercenaries went down into the cellar, they saw not frightened and helpless girls, but 5 young, but determined, women. Under the leadership of Alice, who had planned ahead in case they were found, they had hidden some of Samuel's tools in secret stashes. And when the mercenaries found themselves in the cellar, which was small and dark, the girls attacked them. It was a desperate battle. Catherine, despite her timidity, hit Jack on the head with an iron bucket. Mary, using her audacity, distracted Thomas, while Sarah, the strongest physically, tied his feet with a rope. Alice, armed with an old lantern, hit Jack over the head with it, and he was barely on his feet. Hannah, though the youngest, found the strength to help her sisters. In the end, the mercenaries, dazed and beaten, were tied up. The girls, breathing heavily, looked at them, and then at Samuel, who was getting up from the floor. He slowly stood up, holding his head, and sought his saviors. There was no longer any fear in their eyes, only a firm resolve. "What should we do with them, Sam?" Alice asked, and her voice no longer held the pain of the past, only anger and readiness to act. Samuel looked at the mercenaries, and then at the girls. He saw that these girls, whom he had tried to protect, had become their own protectors. It was their small, but important battle, and he realized that his role in their lives would not be limited to just protection. He had a long road ahead of him with them. He didn't know where this road would lead, but in his heart, instead of the pain of losing his son, a new hope was now growing. He had found his new family. The next few months flew by. Samuel's farm, once quiet and deserted, was now alive and breathing. The girls, having learned to work around the house and in the garden, had become real mistresses of the home. They had little, but they cherished every new day. Alice, who had become the informal leader, took on the responsibility of planning. Sarah and Mary, despite their defiant nature, turned out to be very hardworking. Hannah and Catherine, once timid and withdrawn, blossomed, finding peace and security. Samuel, watching them, felt truly happy. He was surrounded by care and love, something he hadn't felt since his wife's death. His pain from the loss of his son gradually subsided, replaced by the warm feeling that he was needed again. But the idyll was destined to end. One morning, as Samuel was mending the fence, a group of riders appeared in the distance. It wasn't 2 mercenaries, but 10 of them. In front, on a pitch-black stallion, sat George Bonecrusher White himself. His gaze was cold and calculating, and a predatory smile played on his lips. He was dressed in an expensive black frock coat, and 2 revolvers glistened on his belt. He was not just a merchant, he was a predator who had come for his prey. "Well, old man, you've taken in my little birds," he growled, and there was a malicious glee in his voice. "I thought you were smarter than that." Samuel, without flinching, stepped out to meet him. In that moment, he was not just a farmer, but a protector. In his eyes was a determination that White could not ignore. "They're not yours. They're free people," Sam replied firmly. Those words became the catalyst. White ordered his men to surround the house. An uneven battle ensued. The girls, hearing the shouts, armed themselves with whatever they could find. Alice grabbed an old axe, Sarah a rifle they had found in the barn. Mary and Catherine prepared hot water, and Hannah kitchen knives. They were weak, but their resolve was stronger than all the mercenaries' weapons. The climax came when White, not wanting to waste time, rushed at Sam with a revolver. The old man, possessing the strength and agility he had acquired during his long years of working the land, struck White's hand, knocking the weapon from his grasp. But White was faster. He hit Sam in the face, and the old man fell. At that moment, when it seemed that all was lost, Alice rushed at White with the axe. He, stunned by her audacity, backed away. But his men didn't lose their composure, and at that moment Mary, from the roof of the house, poured boiling water on the mercenaries, while Hannah threw knives at them. The fight was brutal. Samuel, having come to, grabbed a shovel and began to fight back fiercely. The girls, inspired by his example, fought like lionesses. They wounded several mercenaries, but there were too many of them. In the end, White, seeing that victory was not as close as he had expected, decided to use a trick. He grabbed Catherine and, holding a knife to her throat, ordered Sam and the others to surrender. "Either you give me the girls, or I'll slit her throat," he growled, and there was a flash of madness in his eyes. Sam, consumed by despair, could do nothing. His heart was constricted with pain and hopelessness. In that moment, he realized that his old pain from losing his son was nothing compared to what he was feeling now. He had to witness a monstrous injustice again, but this time he could do something. "Let her go," Alice cried out, and in her voice there was not fear, but fury. Without a second thought, she rushed at White, and, using the distraction the other girls had created, plunged a kitchen knife she had been hiding into his side. White, screaming in pain, let go of Catherine. But it didn't end there. Being wounded, he pulled out his revolver and shot at Sam. The old man fell, and his blood stained the ground. The girls, seeing this, let out a cry of horror. White, taking advantage of the moment, grabbed Alice and, holding the barrel to her head, ordered the others to drop their weapons. "Now she's my property," he growled, and victory was written all over his eyes. It was a moment of ultimate despair. The girls were broken, but at that moment, Samuel, lying on the ground, blooded, with his last ounce of strength, whispered, "Run." Those words became a signal for them to act. Without a second thought, they grabbed their weapons and rushed at White. He, not expecting such a turn of events, backed away. But this time they didn't give him a single chance. They surrounded him and, as one, struck him with everything they had. In the end, White was beaten and tied up. The mercenaries, seeing that their leader was defeated, fled. The girls, breathing heavily, stood over Sam's body. He was alive, but wounded. His heart was beating faintly. He, looking at the girls, smiled. His pain from the wound was nothing compared to what he felt, seeing their victory. He had saved them, and they, in turn, had saved him. And at that moment, he felt that his life had not been in vain. He had found a purpose that was far more important than his own existence. He had found his family. To mercenaries, seeing that their leader was defeated, fled. To girls, breathing heavily, stood over Sam's body. He was alive, but wounded. His heart was beating faintly. He, looking at the girls, smiled. His pain from the wound was nothing compared to what he felt, seeing their victory. He had saved them, and they, in turn, had saved him. And at that moment, he felt that his life had not been in vain. He had found a purpose that was far more important than his own existence. He had found his family. To girls, without wasting a minute, carried Sam into the house. Alice, remembering the old skills her healer mother had taught her, began to tend to the wound. She knew they had neither the time nor the means to get to town, so she had to use all her knowledge. With the help of the herbs she had been collecting in the field and a clean cloth they had torn from an old shirt, she did everything she could to stop the bleeding. Sarah, Catherine, Mary, and Hannah, despite their fear, helped her. They held Sam while he cried out in pain and prayed that he would survive. A few days later, Samuel came to. He was weak, but alive. Opening his eyes, he saw 5 girls in front of him who, despite their exhaustion, had not left his side. He smiled and whispered, "Thank you." Those words were their reward. They, realizing that he was okay, burst into tears of happiness. At that moment, looking at them, Samuel realized that the pain of losing his son, which had haunted him his whole life, had now been replaced by something else, something bigger. He had found purpose. He had found his new family. In time, Sam's wounds healed, and life on the far returned to its usual rhythm. The girls, who had once been terrified fugitives, were now his daughters. He taught them how to work the land, and they taught him how to laugh again and appreciate the small things and believe in the best. They laughed, sang, and told stories. They became one big family, and no one, not even White, who was locked in the cellar, could stop them. After a year, the girls finally decided that something had to be done about White. Samuel, remembering that he had an old friend, a sheriff in a neighboring town, decided to take him there. He, along with the girls, set off on the journey, and when they arrived, White was handed over to the justice system. At the trial, which took place in the small town, the girls, despite their fear, testified. They told everything that had happened to them, and their words, as well as their resolve, amazed the whole town. White was found guilty and was executed. Samuel, returning home, decided that his life could not be the same. He, after talking with the girls, offered them to stay with him. They, of course, agreed. They became his family, and, despite their tragic past, they found their way to happiness. In time, the girls got married. They had children, and Samuel became a grandfather. He, looking at his grandchildren, saw in them the reflection of his son, whom he had lost many years ago. He, hugging them, realized that his life had not been in vain. He had found what he had lost, and even more. He had found his family, and this family was much bigger than he could ever have imagined. In the end, Samuel, sitting on the porch of his house, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, watched the sunset. He, smiling, realized that life is not only pain and loss, but also joy, love, and hope. By finding purpose in loss, he had found his happiness. Dear friends, this story is not just a tale about the Wild West. It's a story about how even in the darkest of times, there is always room for hope. Like Samuel, many of us, in our later years, can feel lost and lonely. But this story shows that it's never too late to start over. Your life is not just the past, but also the present and the future. And, like Samuel, you can find a new purpose, a new family, a new joy. Just open your heart to others, and you will see that life, even at 65 plus, is full of new opportunities and new adventures. Don't be afraid to help others, and you will see that this help will return to you 100-fold. May this story be an inspiration and a reminder to you that your life, like Samuel's, is full of purpose and love.